Welcome to the Solution Nation podcast. My name is Sharon and I'm the president of Solution Nation. Solution Nation is dedicated to providing a platform for investors to learn about Israel's most dynamic public and private companies. We interview lead venture capitalists, Wall Street analysts, investment bankers, and managers of incubators and accelerators. Today's guest is Sharon Handelman Gotlib, and our topic is investing in Israeli Femtech. Now, Femtech is a broad field encompassing everything from heart disease to reproductive treatment, from oncology to menopause, and from breastfeeding to menstrual cycles. In this podcast, we learn that the two genders require different treatment regimens and demonstrate different symptoms for the onset of various diseases. Please remember that all content provided on the Solution Nation podcast and website is for educational purposes only. Nothing shall be construed as investment advice. Investment decisions shall not be made based on information, written, verbal, or otherwise, posted or spoken on Solution Nation. Conduct your own research or consult with your own investment advisors before making investment decisions. So here's my good friend, the host of the show, and the CEO of Solution Nation, David Wanatik.
Hello, everyone. I'm David Wanatik. Thank you very much for joining the Solution Nation podcast. Today, we're going to have a very interesting session. The topic is investing in Israeli Femtech companies, or investing in Israeli feminine technology. Speaking on this subject, very pleased to introduce Sharon Handelman Gotlib. Sharon Handelman Gotlib is the Business Development Manager at the Sampo Digital Lab in Tel Aviv. She also serves as a part of the Israel Femtech Community Management Team. So, Sharon, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure being here.
Would you like to expand a little bit on your background just for a minute or so and tell us a little bit more about what the Sampo Digital Lab is?
Sure, happy to. So my background, I've been working in pharma and health and innovation in the last, I'd say, decade or so. Started with pharmaceutical, Teva, working in Teva, and then continuing to lead the innovation at Maccabi, which is the second largest HMO in Israel. And working into those areas is the focus of finding the right technologies, the right solutions, mainly on the digital space to support patients, consumers, customers, and at the essence of it all, supporting our health and well-being. So today I'm part of Sampo in the innovation channel or network as part of the largest Sampo corporate, which is an insurance company at the essence of it. And Sampo is a very large Japanese insurance company. However, it works and has footprint in over 30 countries around the globe, mainly focusing on life insurance, property and casualty, which is the core kind of products that they bring to the table. But aside from that, Sampo has a very unique offering in the Japanese market, which is leading the aging space with the largest network of home care facilities in Japan. So, as I said, I'm part of the innovation network, and I head the healthcare, well-being, and aging business development. And my job kind of reflects the Sampo overall approach is to find the right potential partners and collaborating with them, mainly in the Israeli and European ecosystem, to find the right solutions to meet the local challenges and identify areas that can bring value to the Japanese, but not only, and as of course, additional markets to bring that to the table. We also have the ability and capability to invest in companies. And our uniqueness here in the lab in Israel is the fact that we also have our own incubation team. So it's a mini R&D center, and we kind of curate solutions and bring them into the world. And I'm happy to be part of that as well.
Great. How many companies are currently part of the incubation at your digital lab?
So the incubation is purely internal. It's ideas that we curate on our own, according to the strategy, the company strategy, and bring solutions. And we have, I'd say, a pipeline of a few already.
Okay, great. Great. So we're going to talk about femtech or feminine technology. That seems that to be a very broad subject. Can you define what Femtech means, at least to you?
Sure. And I'll say before that, my second hat is the fact that I'm part of the Femtech community here in Israel management team. We've established this community, and I've been part of that in the last year and a half. And we've grown. We have in our community almost 4,000 people being part. Some are more active, some are even more active in the community. But the idea is to kind of promote the discussion, awareness, and collaboration between our community members in the ecosystem, in the Israeli ecosystem. And the question is fair. What is Femtech? And I'd say it's a good question, because for many, many have different answers to that. I tried to simplify the answer into a very basic one, which is I'd say, more conservative approach to Femtech, which is any technology supporting women's health and well-being. That the Femtech, which is female technology, was coined by Ida Tin in 1916. She comes from Europe, and she was the founder of one of the first Femtech companies, which is called Clue, which is around cycle management and cycle management tracking and supporting women to track their cycle management of relation, etc. And she coined this word, this Femtech, and in the 6 years or so, it was able to kind of bring its own life and to reach some kind of consensus. Some women or some people would say, I disagree with Femtech, because what do we have Mentech? That's not a term that they'd like to use. Some call it different names, but all in all, from where I see things, as long as it promotes the health and well-being of women, it can be called Femtech, and can choose a different coining if it suits others, but it's the target that matters and the cause for that. So that generally is Femtech, and Femtech is around many topics in women's health. It can start with the range of ages. It can touch the range of conditions that women come across throughout the lifespan, and so on. And it can be diseases, conditions, and on and on. I think that the main categories today in Femtech are pregnancy, of course, prenatal, postpartum, and those types. It can be accountable to the areas of longevity, to general diseases, to mental health, and so on. So the categories are growing, and we're seeing also the expansion of those as we speak.
Okay. So just to further define this, when we talk about Femtech, we're talking about a real woman that was born as a woman with two X chromosomes, not as somebody that identifies as a woman.
That too is under the Femtech, and I mean, one of the categories in growing, I think, areas of interest is the one to approach the other ones that consider themselves female, maybe those who were born with different chromosome set, with an X and Y, and bringing those solutions also to support women, because they have certain challenges in their life and certain needs. So it's definitely something that Femtech addresses and approaches, and trying to find the solutions as this category is growing as well. So yeah, so for that category, again, it varies in the naming and the coining in the terms, but Femtech oversees solutions for that space as well. So yeah.
Okay. So if we look at some of the issues that affect both men and women, maybe you can distinguish what specifically is being done for women. So both men and women have to be concerned about things like heart disease, cancer, bone health. So what is different about developing medicine for women when you're talking about addressing malfunctions with organs that are common to both sexes?
Okay. I can speak about that for hours, so please cut me when they chime in and tell me when to stop. And I'll say that is one of the key areas of challenges, and I think I'd say the evils of why we need Femtech and why it's so important for us to have the discussion. So historically, for many reasons, clinical trials, medicine development, and medical treatments, devices were created by and for men. What do I mean by? Mostly physicians, male physicians, and tried out on male population. So if we're looking to the example that you shared, the heart attacks and all the cardiology area, those were clinical trials what were conducted on a very specific profile of a person, typically an average white male, the age of 45, and therefore all the conditions are fairly honing into that specific profile. And women are just considered to be just a smaller scale man. What does it mean? It means that all the symptoms, all the indications, all the development of the drugs and the treatment are profiled and targeted to those indications, and the diagnostic based on those clinical trials will give a very narrowed solution or supporting mainly men. And what is I'd say the risk in that, or the evil, as I used that before, it does not bring the solutions or consider the needs and challenges of women. So heart attacks, women have different symptoms while suffering a heart attack. So when they come to the doctor for a prognosis and they say, I'm feeling nauseous, I'm feeling X and Y, their physician would typically dismiss them, saying, oh, that's nothing, maybe a mental issue, maybe you're having a bad day, but they're not being diagnosed with a heart attack and being dismissed, ignored, and sent home. The death rates.
So perhaps, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would guess based on what you're saying that a man may have chest pain, may hold his chest, feel something is wrong in his heart, but a woman may not do that and may feel more nauseous, and that could be the precursor of heart attack.
You're correct. Women will have a different set of symptoms. So it's not necessarily holding kind of her chest and saying, I have pain. No, totally different symptoms. Therefore, because historically, the set of criteria were defined by men for men, this would be ignored and not considered as an issue or a symptom of indication of something going on. And what we're doing now and changing that, and this is part of a huge movement, and it also great expert. I can give examples of great work by Dr. Abital Porter in the Baileyson Institute working on that and having a unit dedicated for that, and studies and research. And again, it's a global movement that's changing this paradigm and saying we now acknowledge the fact that women were not part of clinical studies, were not part of defining the symptoms, solutions, the disease kind of discovery process, and now it's starting to change. And the Femtech movement and the Women's Health Organization are saying we need to have clinical studies which are focused on women and are targeted on them, and being able to differentiate between symptoms which are more relevant for men and more relevant for women. And if we're having those studies, to ensure that we have a 50-50 ratio and that we're not getting bias to the women results. So that's one. And the second one is for diseases which are more feminine oriented, based on our physiology, of course, which goes without saying. And of course, those studies are more advanced if we see, for example, breast cancer. So it's the most common one, or at least the most spoken one. But there are other female diseases which are only now in the last few years that are starting to get the attention. It's not only diseases. I can give more examples, of course, but if we're discussing ovarian cancer, we still have very limited solutions for that. And the studies, the clinical studies, the research is only at the baby steps, and we have a very long way to go. I can give another example for an indication for feminine, which is the endometriosis, which affects 10% of women population, yet the diagnosis of that takes 7 years in average, which is unheard of, wild. Where will we have something like that take to diagnose a man's indication, a disease, 7 years? Nowhere. But this indication, which women suffer some very painfully from, it's a 7-year journey, and it's a hell of a journey. And being dismissed, being considered mentally ill, being claimed to just imagine things, instead of having that diagnosed much quicker, in a faster and more customer patient-oriented kind of approach into that. So these are the things that today are changing, and today are more consensus than in the past, and of course have the awareness from women, from the medical ecosystem, from the technology ecosystem, and the approach of let's find solutions to what we need.
Okay. So you talk about more men participating in clinical studies. Is that still the case? And also, you look at the professionals, it must be about 50% of men and women going to medical school. It must be pretty close to that in Israel, United States, Europe. So that's probably changing. But when a company does a study on heart disease or stroke or something like that, what do you believe the current ratio is between male and female subjects in those clinical studies?
Well, today I'd assume they'd be closer to equal, if not equal, then much closer in the past, because in the past it was absolutely nothing, or very close to that. Again, for numerous reasons. And as I said, it's shifting, but it takes time. I'll give you an example, a very close one historically, when Pfizer conducted, when the clinical studies were conducted for the COVID disease and medicine, so giving the solution. In the clinical studies, when they submitted into the clinical approval to the FDAs and all those authority and regulation authorities, they noticed that more men were part of the studies, and they forgot to have it balanced. Therefore, they were sent back to the drawing room and saying, go check this again with higher rates of women, because they cannot be ignored. So that was changed and modified. But again, why not think that from the get-go, from the beginning? Why not have,
Well, perhaps there was some ethical consideration. If you're looking at a very new pandemic, which in the beginning, nobody really knew what was going on, is there an argument that it was more ethical to do it the way they did it? Because if you put an experimental drug in a woman's body, you're jeopardizing her, perhaps her ability to have children. You may, so you don't have that risk with men. So is that a valid reason to maybe not have so many younger women in the studies?
So it can be, you can then claim that it's always a valid argument for any kind of cardiology claims or any other type of disease, which is, I'd say, equal. Therefore, again, when you go through medication and pharmaceutical approval process, you have, before going into human studies and research, you have stages before that to consider and to support the efficacy and to reduce the risk. I'm no pharma expert, even though I worked in pharma, to explain that, and I can go into that as well in details. But you put the measures in place to support the risk factors into that and reduce that. So I'd say that it may consider that, but you'd also want to have the understanding of what are the risks for women, because in the bottom line, when the vaccination was given equally to women and men, then women started with the claims of the lateral damage or the side effects, which were unnoticeable until then. It affected the cycle, the menstruation, the cycle itself, and other symptoms and conditions that women later on paid attention to. And it took time also for the scientific, I'd say, ecosystem and so this club to say, well, maybe our claim, women's claim, is accurate. The fact that we're missing periods or skipping a few days or other kind of claims, maybe there's something there. So instead of identifying that and having the discussion later, why couldn't we have that discussion earlier? I think so. That's kind of an interesting, again, I'd say, claim to the fact that we need to consider all types of population, of course, from an ethical standpoint and from an efficacy and safety, I'd say, parameters and look out. We need to be very cautious, but we need to be cautious. We always have to be cautious in that. And those claims, again, the COVID vaccination was an excellent use case for the fact that women weren't part of that in the beginning, then had to revalidate the studies. And then the fact that we got the side effects that weren't identified in the beginning and required to a very late addressing from the scientific kind of space and pharma space.
Okay. I'd like to go back just for a second and talk about the precursors to the onset of a heart attack, or heart disease, or stroke. I think this is almost a public service that you're doing now. So maybe, again, you could be a little more specific about what the differences are in men and women, the precursors to stroke and heart disease. I think it's very important for the listener to be aware of that.
Yeah. So I need to look that up. I can be very specific in that, just a minute.
Okay. So as you're doing that, it seems like there might be need for another field of study, child tech, because we're talking about there's differences in men's bodies versus women's bodies, but there's also differences between adults and children's bodies.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So maybe you'll come back in a year and talk to us about child tech as well.
And I'll say again, this is kind of a doctrine that is growing and being more accepted by the world. It's called personalized medicine. That's one. So each one has a different way of receiving medicine, receiving treatment, and also each one has a different way of being diagnosed. So we all have different ways of showing that. So that's one, on a personalized space. Again, age, gender factor, and gender-based medicine, which again is something which is growing. This notion is growing both in academia and in real life. So when you look at that today in academia, we are seeing more gender courses, gender medicine, gender approach, medication, and medical approaches. You see this growing in Israel, in the States, in Europe, growing more and more. So the attention, the awareness from the faculties to the medicine schools, to the doctors, to technology, to the startups, that's one. It's how to create devices. I mean, again, created by men without having women as part of that. Wow, that's a big thing. Men creating devices being very functional, and less, I'd say, customer experience, women customer-based experience or acceptance. So today, again, that's changing. Instead of it being, and there's so many examples for that, even in the medicine. I heard on one of the conferences that I just attended that the medical devices in surgery were, again, designed for men. So there are more, as you said as well, more women surgeons and more physicians, and then them coming into the surgery room and trying to work with the tools, which are too heavy or too big and not fitted to our physiologically matched. That's an issue. And therefore, we need to design tools for consumers, for patients, and for also the caregivers, the physicians, to match how we are built. So we can have it better, we can operate it better, and we can consume it better. So that's another factor, the fact that it's not part of that. And I'd say, again, also for the fact that, yes, it's gender-based, we should have those studies for sure for those diseases that we commonly share, but also to the diseases that were up until now not discussed. So these are kind of the three things that I for sure we're going to see major accomplishments, and I'd be happy to share insights on that specifically. I mean, also for cardiology, heart attacks, and the like, we can have, there are podcasts around that as well, and tons of experts, but it's only the tip of the iceberg, and I think it can be addressed to most anything that you can think of on a mental health basis, on symptoms, heart attacks, growing up, what have. So we see that difference again and again, and I see the shift today. I also wanted to point out that you mentioned before the heart attack symptoms. So yes, women have different symptoms, and it can be as neck or jaw pains, discomfort, shortness of breath, pain in one or both arms, feeling nauseous, vomiting, sweating, dizziness, fatigue, heartburn. These are not symptoms that are shared by men typically. So they're very different. And as I said before, because of the fact that the prognosis diagnostic was based on male, we can easily understand why women are dismissed and why the risk factors were ignored, and why as a result of that, we see higher rates of mortality under the heart diseases in women's, why they were higher, or at least to the detection and treatment of those. So again, this is a topic that we can honestly speak about for hours.
Okay, so the precursors you just mentioned are probably very important for women, I guess, in their 50s and beyond, to not be dismissive of those feelings and sensations. They may be much more significant than just a little bit of pain in the arms or a little bit of shortness of the breath. So, okay, that was a very important comment you made. Maybe you can save a few lives with that comment. So maybe we can talk about a couple of issues that are relevant only to women. If we look at reproductive health, maybe you can say a few words about that, and if there's any Israeli companies that you want to mention that are doing very interesting things in reproductive health. I guess we can start from the point of a woman that may have trouble getting pregnant. What can be done to help a woman that's having difficulty becoming pregnant, and then what treatment does she need while she is pregnant?
Sure. So there's a lot going in that field. And of course, from a global perspective, we see the majority of investments, or a high percentage of that, focused on those areas of pregnancy and nursing. Hence the fact that everybody likes to deal with that. It's a good, I'd say, category to deal with, a very positive one, based, and also one which is very, on a commercial business standpoint, very economic, especially if we consider the space in Israel, which women are granted the endless amount of IVF procedures and cycles. and it's budgeted and completely by the government, by the country, by the HMOs. So for us as a society, which we find very important to have children, we are very predominantly a child-oriented society in Israel, promoting and kind of encouraging a high rates of birth. So I'd say that's, again, it's very different than other countries. We see the average or the decline in birth rates in Western and Eastern populations and countries. In Israel, it's the opposite. We don't see that decrease. The numbers are higher. Again, if we look into all segments and categories, demographic categories in Israel, we see that religious one, Orthodox, secular, Jewish, Arab, you name it, they're higher rates than the average one. And it's evident, I guess, when you go to summer vacations in Europe or in the US, and the typical or average Israeli family would be a size of 2 + 3 or maybe 2 + 4 children. In Europe, that's not the case. And in Asia, of course, it's not the case. And in most Western ones, which is 2, maybe +1 child or 2 children, and sometimes 1 + 1, or, it's different models, but definitely not high. And therefore, it's easy to identify, I'd say, an Israeli kind of typical family because it's 2 plus a bigger amount of kids and sometimes more louder. So that's another aspect of that. So yes, fertility, pregnancy are very important in Israel and very important in the world. And the rates of a fertility cycle are very low. And because of, again, other factors that we can discuss or can elaborate in another time, is the fact that women are now giving birth in a much older age than in the past. So historically, if women once gave birth at the age of, I'd say, average 20, 25, 30, today we find it normal to give birth first child at the age of 40, sometimes pushing even the later 40s and closer to 50s. So as we grow, the fertility rates decrease both for men and for women, by the way, and therefore the likelihood of conceiving and being it a natural process reduces dramatically. Therefore, we need the involvement and the support of technology. And in Israel, it's easier because we have very good data sets coming from the hospitals and the HMO, and being able to provide those cycles and those treatments, as I said, created this I'd say space or infrastructure of a large set of data that was the opportunity for startups and research and studies to kind of bloom and nourish, because we had the data, we had the facilities, and we also have the support of all the ecosystems, starting from the patients and going into the clinicians, the hospitals, etc. So that was kind of the infrastructure, and I'd say the outline of this very growing and very strong space in the femtech space for fertility. And we do see strong fertility startups in Israel, even those that managed to secure very interesting numbers in funding in the last few months. So one company raised just 2 months ago, $25 million to a higher round, and to going forward with their studies and development phase, which is super exciting. And another fertility company with a lower amount of dollar, but also a fairly large check to again support and continue the growth journey of that company. And I'm seeing also early stage fertility companies being able to secure fundings from VCs, from angels, and that's encouraging. Same goes for pregnancy monitoring, ultrasounds, and other solutions for women. So this is a growing one. It's a kind of it's growing in a nice and very strong, positive way. And it also matches the same ones going on in the global trend.
Okay, so the companies that are helping women become pregnant, these companies that are getting funding, are they improving on the established IVF treatment, or do they bring new solutions, different ways of helping women get pregnant?
Great question. So I'd say again, historically or conservatively, the companies today, or at least up until now, are focused on the operational side. So identifying what are the chances of going into and taking into factor the conditions of the embryo and defining which one would be suitable, which one would have the higher likelihood to nourish and actually become a baby with higher rates of success of the process itself. So that's one. But today we're also seeing other startups. It's starting from the cycle management, which again is very well established and a very, I'd say, solid already kind of segment. So it starts with identifying the right ovulation time, the period, the time of month for conceiving, that's one. And then also the identification of the issues or the challenges. So these are kind of also the newest in town, or in the newest, I'd say, kids in the block, to identify symptoms. And as I mentioned, there are many conditions that were dismissed or not really looked into up until the last few years. So these are kind of the startups that give the power or empower women and couples to understand what are the challenges, what are the issues that they have on a personalized level, and to find the right treatment solution, and so on to be able to reach their target at the end of the day, which is having a child. So we see both the more traditional ones, and now blooming the ones which are more based on data, more based on personalized data and other solutions.
Okay. So once a woman is pregnant, maybe you can talk if there's any Israeli companies or technologies that detect if there's a problem with the fetus, and if there is a problem, how those problems can be dealt with while the woman's pregnant.
So there are many solutions in that space, and I'll give, I think, a more maybe perhaps a broader aspect to that is the fact that we're seeing Israeli great startups supporting the ongoing every mom or couple or future mom to be of indicating the ongoing process of monitoring. The continuous monitoring, both on the monitoring aspect and the ultrasound from a remote standpoint. And it was more kind of appreciated in the last few years, hence COVID, when we all were locked down and going to the doctor was basically not something that you could do. And the telehealth solutions and remote patient monitoring, specifically in the Femtech space, really gave the solution and the support needed for this very sensitive period of time for a woman. Every woman, every couple during pregnancy is in a higher state of sensitivity and kind of awareness and fear and anxiety if a woman doesn't feel the fetus kicking or the movements, or kind of being kind of aware or kind of conscious of things that may be going wrong. And I think we see the Israeli companies providing great solutions and with high accuracy and very, very good customer experience solutions to reduce the anxiety and to create this great connectivity between the physician and the couple, the mother, in a very easy and intuitive way. And so this is kind of something that we see. I can have, at least when I'm thinking of at least 3 or 4 very strong companies in that space. And of course, the additional ones which are more around community support, telehealth, and other solutions and offerings to given to women throughout pregnancy. I can speak of again the support of telehealth, the fact that there are chats, but also on the devices themselves. So we see the range of those solutions improving and getting into the mainstream processes today, even after COVID.
I wonder if there's any technologies that go into reproductive health that come from the Israeli military, different ways of having greater vision into which of the embryos are better, being able to detect tiny vibrations that are, used to detect if there's tunnels towards the south of Israel, for example. And I wonder if there's a movement to transfer some of the military technology to women's health. Yeah.
I can't say that I know of that. I can say that the fact that we have the data stored in for the embryo selection and the strong, I think, academia resources and power and the will to support that, again, from a society standpoint, those brought in the advancement, or at least to be the kind of the spearhead and the cutting edge, bringing cutting edge technologies from Israel to these spaces. I don't know of the connectivity to the Israeli military or the technology coming from that space. It's an interesting avenue, and I'll explore that later. So I don't know of it. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
That's okay. So you mentioned telemedicine. Of course, if a woman has no choice, if she lives in a remote area and has no access to a doctor, of course, telemedicine is better than nothing. But if a woman lives in a big city and she has a choice to have a personal visit with a physician or to do telemedicine, what would you think is better for the patient? Is it always the personal visit, or is that not necessary? Is telemedicine equally as good?
I'd say it's a mix. There's always the in the middle. There's no black and white, and there's no right and wrong. It's also a very subjective question to be answered by the patient, by the woman, what she feels comfortable with, what she finds most effective and most convenient. So I'd say it should be that we have all offerings, and there is no substitute, again, to personalized interaction, in-person interaction. But I'll say that technology can bring in so much value in support, especially when we have limited resources from both ways, both from the user, from the woman specifically. Again, depends on, I'd say that on a general sense of things, as well as specifically for reproductive pregnancy and the like. The fact that we now have the opportunity to go online, to get connected through great devices and great technological solution, can create a better life for both sides, both the physician, the medical side, as well as for the woman or men. Again, it's kind of a general approach in that. So on a personal level, there are things that I can do remotely. There are checkups and examinations that are not possible without in-person touch point. But that as well, also if it's an in-person, it can be also your GP or family doctor to have kind of the network supporting decision-making that can make everybody's life easier by technology or by remote. So if you're going to your family doctor and having an examination, which up until now required a very specific doctoring or a specific physician, today they can have the discussion. They can share the information online in a remote way, in live streaming, and have the decision made by somebody which may be thousands of miles away, but providing the solutions on the spot.
when you look at feminine health, is there a reason to break it down even more, like into ethnicity? So you're an Israeli working for a Japanese insurance company. Once you learn something about treating women, does that have to be further refined based on the ethnicity of the patient?
Absolutely. And again, we've seen ethnicity is a very key factor, and always, like gender medicine and gender kind of health issues, ethnicity has factors, may have, may not have, but it's also always a factor that needs to be looked into. I can say from an ethnicity standpoint, breast cancer and just the makeup, the biological makeup of women is different in Asian versus Western countries. Therefore, the indication, the diagnostic and prognostic and treatment are different and should be acknowledged as that from the get-go and be taken into account through all value change kind of milestones. So yes, ethnicity. You can see that in dense condensity of breast in Asian women versus others, and Afro-Americans have different conditions. And I know that in the US, it's again something which is growing because Afro-American or Hispanic or others or other ethnicities require different kind of prism for that, different solutions, different ways to go about, and different acknowledgement. And we're seeing those developing, and I'm happy to say that seeking kind of areas.
Okay. We'll just cover a couple more topics and we'll let you go. We don't want to take up too much of your time. But as far as breastfeeding goes, now it's more acceptable to breastfeed children different times of the day, different places in public, and so forth. There's kiosks at airports and so on. Is it better for the baby that the baby breastfeeds more frequently during the day, even if they consume the same amount of the mother's milk? Is it better that they get smaller feedings multiple times throughout the day versus the old way, when it wasn't as acceptable to breastfeed throughout the day? Maybe the baby's getting the same amount of milk in the whole day, but less frequently during the day. So is it better the way it is now for the baby?
Honestly, I'm no expert in that field or in this specific field. I'd say it really depends on the mom and on the connection to their baby, the child. I don't have any kind of medical tips for that or recommendations or profiling of what approach is better. I can't say to that as well. I'd say all are good. And if the baby is happy and the mom's happy, it's good enough. So each one to do whatever they feel comfortable with.
Yeah, so the thing that brought that into my mind is there was a study in Vietnam that some of the children's growth was stunted, and they couldn't figure out why, because the children were consuming the same food, the same amount of calories. And what happened was some children only ate twice a day. They would eat the same amount as the kids that ate 3 times a day, but some parents left in the morning, they fed the kids before they left for work, and the parents came back and they fed the kids at night. But it was found that the kids that eat several times during the day, they can better absorb the nutrients and grow better, even though it's the same amount of nutrients. So that was what caused me to think of this. All right, so the last topic.
I'd say, I can just say for the sake of discussion of breastfeeding that there are, again, very interesting Israeli startups and outside of Israel, of course, to support women throughout this period of breastfeeding by examining the quality of milk, the duration, the amount, and giving kind of the reassurance that mothers and parents need for that. So I think from my perspective, which comes less from the medical one or from a doula or a nursing kind of expert, but more from the tech side and more the startup side of things, that I'm seeing those diagnostic kits and devices and training and awareness and community. So that is something that I am seeing, and I can say does very good for women, for the children, and I guess for the whole. So this is my 2 cents that I can contribute in this topic.
Okay. So last topic, menopause. Anything you want to say about what's being done to help women go through menopause? Is the focus on reducing hot flashes or reducing sleep problems? Where's the focus on menopause?
Okay, so what's being done, I'll start in being very provocative around that. Not much or too little. And I'd say I'm very happy to be part of this shaping the future, or seeing the future being shaped better for women, because again, menopause as general femtech or women's health condition was ignored for too long, and just wasn't discussed. It was hush-hush, a taboo, still taboo in many societies, but that again is breaking this wall of taboo, this wall of secret, being a secret or a non-issue topic. We're seeing that kind of crumble and fall apart, and the discussion starts now today with better discussions and better awareness. Women and interesting studies, even from the Japan side of things. The government conducted the first study or questionnaire for women around menopause, and the insights and results were astonishing. And super interesting to discover what percentage of women kind of identify, when do they identify, what happens after that, do they go to their physician, to their OBGYN, and what solution do they have there? And the numbers or the information was, for me, staggering. And I know from at least the Japanese angle, it's work in process, and we're going to see the government and kind of the local ecosystem continuing in the journey of discussion and acknowledgement, which is a huge and very, very significant step. And again, on a global basis, the same in the UK, in the US, in Israel. We're seeing the discussion, we're seeing the awareness. The impact of menopause is, of course, 100%. So it's not a question of an if, like other maybe conditions for women. It's a question of when. So we're talking about an impact in economics, impacting the employment environment, the women at the peak of their career suddenly kind of hit the wall with the symptoms phase. And then it's a question of what that provide the right solutions and the right areas bring those solutions well.
Okay. So women are getting pregnant in many cases later these days. Is menopause happening at the same ages, or is that getting shifted in the period of time of menopause? Is that pretty constant, or is that condensed or elongated?
It's pretty constant, I'd say. We don't see studies showing different ages. Again, but I will say that now the discussion is also shifting into the perimenopause, which wasn't discussed. Again, if menopause was not discussed and women are not aware of, I have those discussions on a daily basis, explaining what menopause is to women, and I'm seeing women saying, "Oh, so this is what's happening to me. This is what I felt a year ago," or when I get the question of, why do you talk about menopause? Why are you so eager to find solutions? You're not suffering from that. But my answer is, I will suffer from at least 30 conditions out of the 50 symptoms of menopause. So why not provide solutions for me in the future? But then the perimenopause really impacts the stage of menopause. So if we are able to identify that and identify the conditions and provide solutions and ease, that will ease, again, the kind of entry into the menopause phase and bring better quality of life in all aspects of life for women and for society. So it's not even the time, It's the definition of what is perimenopause, what are the symptoms there, how does it enter and kind of transition period into the menopause, and what do we do with that?
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for answering all of my questions and educating us about Femtech. We really appreciate it, Sharon. To learn more, the Femtech community you have in Israel, is that a website? Is it in English? Can people learn more from your community?
It's a Femtech. It's a Facebook Hebrew community, unfortunately or fortunately. So it's Hebrew based, and mostly the activities are through Facebook. We also have events, meetups, and I'll say there are other organizations and many kind of associations supporting those needs for women, and easily found on the web.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much, Sharon, for educating us so much on Femtech. Very kind of you. There's a lot to learn, both in the medical community about Femtech and both in the non-medical community, to be aware of some of the precursors to very tragic events that can happen if we're not aware. So, okay, great. We'll end the program at this point. Thank you.